Agents refer to basically any sequential decision-making task where there's an entity, a machine learning model, that's making a sequence of predictions, and each one of those has to be correct for the overall task to be executed correctly. So even if the accuracy at each step is like 90%, the 10% error rate can compound very quickly to lead to poor success rates over a 10-step, 30-step, 50-step workflow.
Today's episode is about the much debated and incredibly impactful topic of, should founders build vertical or horizontal products in AI? Our guest, Abhishek Das, has a strong opinion on this. He is the co-founder and co-CEO of Yutori, a startup that is reimagining the way people interact with the web. Their first product is Scouts, which are agents that monitor the web for anything you care about. To date, Yutori has raised over 15 million by Radical Ventures and Felicis, as well as angels including Ali Gil, Sarah Guo, Scott Belsky, Guillermo from Vercel, and Akshay from Notion, and many more. And as for Abhishek, he was a research scientist at the Fundamental AI Research Fair at Meta, working on deep neural networks, and he has a PhD in computer science from Georgia Tech for his work around developing AI agents that can see, talk, and act, which he started working on in 2016 already. So with that, welcome to us. It's wonderful to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Pascal.
Of course, I'm excited about this one. So today's topic is a much debated one, including in our venture community. Should startups build vertical or horizontal products in AI? All right, but before we dive into that very deep, let's start with the strong view that you have that actually impacts your take on building horizontal versus vertical. Specifically, you're convinced that we're going to be interacting with the web, or how we're going to interact with the web in 5 to 10 years will look fundamentally different to today. Why and how?
So if you think about how people interact with the web, it hasn't quite changed in the last 2 to 3 decades. By and large, like we still open up a browser, put in the website URL, click buttons, type stuff, scroll, etc. It is quite manual, and the broad sort of usage pattern of it hasn't quite changed. But we're at an interesting sort of inflection point right now, where if you look into the future, like 5 to 10 years into the future, I think there's the potential to reimagine what interacting with the web looks like. And specifically, instead of us having to manually sort of interact with websites, navigate websites, we might be operating at a higher level of abstraction where we're talking to AI assistants that are performing tasks on the web for us. So these might be teams of agents working in the background in an always-on proactive manner that can interact with APIs and websites to get tasks done for us. And there's good reason to believe, like there's analogies we can look at in other areas of AI where similar trends have played out. Like if you consider software development, for example, we are very much moving into the realm of like LLMs and agents sort of writing a lot of code. And that does two things, right? Like it helps lower the floor. There's a lot of people in the world who have cool ideas for apps or mini apps they want to develop, and can now just come up with the first prototype without knowing anything about programming or coding. And it also raises the ceiling, right? Like developers now, if they know how to use these tools well, are way more or can be way more productive. Now, I don't want to paint the picture that like agents, especially coding agents, are perfect today, but the arc of progress is sort of moving towards that. So we're betting. So our vision is sort of to invent the technology to usher in a similar change in how people interact with the web.
So if you think about it from a user perspective, then just to make it very kind of visual for people listening, how should I think about it kind of from a user's consumer and user perspective around how am I going to be interacting with the web differently than today?
If let's say you want to book a booking at the if you want to get a slot at the DMV, you can just tell an assistant that like book me an appointment for Friday morning at my local DMV around this zip code. Or you can maybe interact with websites via a text message where like behind the scenes, these agents are interacting with one or multiple websites to get tasks done for you. So one example of it could be like check with my mother when she's done grocery shopping and call an Uber for her when she's done, right? That's interacting with multiple apps, multiple websites to perform to get to an end outcome that someone cares about um, is not possible to do today, but might be possible once we have sufficiently reliable and competent agents that can do tasks for you.
Which is interesting, right? Because as a human, that we all get trained in our education system and everything else to be very good at executing. But again, this is at such that, as you said, it's a higher level of abstraction in terms of thinking, and our productivity is increasingly bound, right, not just by our execution speed, but basically our ability to kind of come up with creative ideas to be even more productive as a human being and instruct others to work for us. A lot of this is closely tied, and before we move on into kind of horizontal versus vertical, a lot of this is tied to your PhD work. How did that, maybe quickly, right, tell us what your PhD was about, and then how that actually impacted and shaped your thesis of how we're going to be interacting with the web going forward?
So my PhD thesis was called Building Agents That Can See, Talk, and Act. I got my PhD at Georgia Tech between the years 2016 to 2020. I do want to clarify that, like back then, agents meant a very specific class of problems in machine learning research. Now they're, of course, a much more overloaded term. But the core essence, I think, is still the same of that word and what it means. So agents refer to basically any sequential decision-making task where there's an entity, a machine learning model that's making a sequence of predictions, and each one of those has to be correct for the overall task to be executed correctly. So even if the accuracy at each step is like 90%, the 10% error rate can compound very quickly to lead to poor success rates over a 10-step, 30-step, 50-step workflow, right? So in my PhD, I was basically working at the intersection of computer vision, language, and reinforcement learning, and looking at agents in that context. So to give a very specific example, imagine a home robot and asking it the question, "Where did I leave my keys?" In order to answer that question, the robot would need to understand language. It would need to know how to navigate an indoor environment, and then come back to you with the answer or with the object that you asked about. And I was looking at how do we train deep learning models for these kinds of sequential decision making tasks. I wasn't working with actual robots. I was working in simulation, but it had all of these elements of computer vision, language, and reinforcement learning, sort of to instill this kind of long horizon task capability. And yeah, I was looking at this space from multiple angles. So some of the papers I published during my PhD were looking at just vision and language. So visual chatbots, for example, multi-turn interactions with a chatbot that can talk about images and videos. That was a line of work that I did. And then how do we extend that to embodiment? So not only can you chat with an entity, but it can also move around in an indoor environment to get a particular task done to answer questions. I spent time at Fair at Meta on some of these problems. I spent time at DeepMind working on some of these problems, as well as at Tesla Autopilot as part of the vision team, looking at some of these problems.
Now, I have to kind of connect that very briefly back to the browser and how we're going to interact with the web. One of the things you mentioned is obviously, right, you have to get decisions right at every almost like micro step, and even a 90% accuracy rate sounds high, but if that compounds, is that it's actually incredibly inaccurate. Outside of that, right, what are maybe some of the complexities that a lot of us who don't know this world very well don't fully appreciate that you have to get right or understand, that you maybe do better because you did, right, that research work in that area since 2016, which was, from where I stand, incredibly early to the space as well.
One other sort of behavior pattern that comes extremely intuitively to us as humans, but is hard to instill in machines, is the ability to quickly detect when a mistake is made and backtrack. So if I think of that, lay that out in the context of web agents, like there's a long fat tail of websites out there. There's no way anyone can train on every single possible web page that's out there. That's just too big of a combinatorial space. So what we are betting on, or what we are trying to instill into the model when we are training these models, is for them to have some level of generalization and robustness, right? So whenever it lands on a new website, maybe it clicks the wrong button and it needs to backtrack. So it should be able to detect very quickly that it made an error, and to be able to backtrack from that error and try some other approach. So that's another sort of fairly general, broad-ranging behavioral trait that is pretty important to instill into these models when we are training them. And reinforcement learning is actually a good way to instill this particular behavior pattern into models.
All right, that's also a great segue to kind of what I wanted to talk about, which is early on in your journey, you actually built kind of a much more, it's not fully vertical because it's within consumer, but like almost like what's probably closer to a verticalized approach, and realized it didn't really work. So maybe help us understand, like, what did you build first, and why and how did you realize that this approach actually wouldn't actually scale?
So just to lay the context for your audience, one of the first things, so Yutori's existed like almost for a year and a half at this point. One of the first things that we were going after was that, okay, let's try and build an end-to-end consumer focused workflow, like food ordering. And so that would involve authentication, that would involve an agent interacting with the underlying website, and yeah, like let's see what it takes to build that, and then see if we can translate that into like a rinse and repeat recipe that would generalize to other websites. That was kind of the approach that we took. So the first thing that we built for food ordering was something that would like it would take in a fairly general purpose prompt. So you could tell it something as specific as order me a Big Mac from the McDonald's on Geary Street, or something as generic as order me something spicy. And it would look at a bunch of different restaurants on DoorDash. It would pick out the right the relevant food items that make sense from each of those restaurants, surface that as options to the user. It will wait for the user to confirm. It will surface like one default and like a couple of additional recommendations. It will wait for the user to confirm, and if the user confirms, then it will go ahead and add those items to the cart for the user to do a one-click checkout. Right. So from a consumer standpoint, all that you have to do is give it a prompt that order me something spicy from a restaurant near me, and it can take it all the way to the checkout cart. So one of the issues, or like there were several issues with this in hindsight, and this was an informative sort of learning experience for us. Right. One of the issues was that if you're training some of these models on like individual websites for an end-to-end workflow, then that doesn't lend the kind of generalization that we would that we can make use of to go broader to other websites. Like these models start memorizing the UI patterns and the quirks of, let's say, DoorDash, or one like a particular website that we're training on, and that doesn't generalize easily. Whereas that's not how the web overall is laid out, right? Like um, the like a lot of shopping websites have slight UI differences, but by and large the structure is similar. So if we can train on all of them together, or like mix and match in some way, then that makes these models generalize much better, right? That's one. Another issue with this is that it's basically like a um, like for an end user, it's not that big of a value proposition that yes, you can do an end-to-end task reliably, but yeah, if an end user is spending like 2 minutes ordering stuff from DoorDash, and if you're saving them 2 minutes once a week, that's not much at all, right? And so
There's also when you're hungry, you don't really know what you want, so there's a lot of value to actually browsing through it as well. But
yeah,
no, 100%.
so there is a discovery and maybe even a dopamine effect around this, where they don't want to automate. They don't want an automation for some of this. Yeah. So that was interesting. We never really shipped this. This was more like an internal prototype and a learning experiment, but it kind of led us to rethink our strategy a little bit of how these agents, how we should be building these agents, what our go-to-market looks like. Right? We were in some sense quite like overly optimistic that like, okay, if we can make an end-to-end workflow work for like one website, then we'll be able to come up with a rinse and repeat sort of recipe, and we'll be able to make agents work for a broad range of websites. And I think the reliability point is understated here. That like getting a an agent that's like 50% reliable to like 80% reliable to like 90% reliable to like 99.999% reliable is like that scales like in some sense linear. Like it takes a while to get agents to be 99.999% reliable.
That's then an interesting question as kind of a startup founder. And like we work a lot more with B2B companies, so I don't understand the consumer space that well, but it's for someone just getting started, it's much easier to focus on a much more narrow problem, right? And it's you're gonna get to a result much quicker. And um you're also depending on how much you can fundraise, right? You have limited runway and everything, so you want to show that you can actually deliver a customer outcome and monetize that in a way that allows you to continue on the like milestones based funding world that venture is for the most part, at least, unless you're in hot space. You then, right? You guys then decided to focus much more on a kind of horizontal approach, as you said, a much more general approach. Maybe before we dive into kind of more the nuances of it, what put you over the edge that, right, the one website based approach and then generalizing it wasn't really it, and like kind of got you to actually you and the rest of your team to make a much bolder, bigger bet, um, to focus on a much more general purpose horizontal approach instead?
On the first question, it was basically empirical. We looked at what the behavior of some of these models looked like on the websites that it was trained on and other similar food ordering websites even. So in the same category, not too far off in generalization. And it became clear looking at some of those examples that like there were a lot of specific quirks that these models had picked up on that are specific to one website. So it was like a kind of memorization that doesn't generalize to other websites. So yeah, that basically made it very clear that we need to approach this differently than how we had. Um, and the shift to horizontal, I would say it's not as greenfield or as broad or as bold of a bet that it may initially seem. So what we did was that we changed our scoping to be more capability focused than website focused. So the first product that we shipped, which is called Scouts, it's powered by agents that can monitor the web for you. So monitoring is still a read-only exercise. We're not saying that it will buy, book, reserve things for you, um, but we are saying that it can monitor anything for you on any website, any publicly available information on any websites, right? So on some websites, that information might be easily available via, let's say, a Google search. On other websites, you may like, for example, if you're looking for like a campground at Yosemite, you may have to fill out a lightweight form that like what are the dates, how many people, whether it's pet friendly or not, to extract the right piece of information, and it will be able to handle both. But it is still scoped to read only tasks only. We're not saying that it will go ahead and actually log into services or buy, book, reserve things for you. Both of those were explicitly out of scope in how we scoped it. Um, and what that led to was that we were able to train these models quite well on a sufficiently large set of websites through mid-training, SFT, reinforcement learning, um, and so we started seeing more and more like even if it was scoped to be a read-only task, we started seeing more and more generalization, where like the because it was trained on like even within each category, like within shopping, it was trained on a diverse set, like like there was enough diversity of UIs within each category that made the agent generalize quite well, and it was much more robust and less fragile than it was earlier.
Maybe right for founder listening to this, who almost like independently of what space they're building in, they're early on kind of thinking about, right, should I focus again more on the vertical versus horizontal problem and everything. Do you have any sort of frameworks or questions to ask or anything, right, that you guys kind of went through in that journey, or considerations, because everything in life is trade-offs ultimately, kind of considerations that you guys made that will be helpful for others to think through as well as they go through that kind of decision-making process?
Maybe a couple of things. One other thing that happened when we made the shift to Scouts and agents that can monitor the tasks for your agents that can do read-only tasks was that we explicitly, from a user outcome standpoint, we explicitly, or user value standpoint, we explicitly took the stance that this is not going to be doing an entire end-to-end task on day one. Like when the user first uses our product, they will set this up for monitoring concert tickets or campground reservations or like sourcing sales leads, but it is not actually going to book them or reach out to them and so on. Right. So we made a different scoping trade-off than we had made initially with the food ordering example. There we had said that, okay, no, we will do an end-to-end task, but we will do just one task to start with. So that for different verticals, for different kinds of businesses, whether it's consumer, enterprise, narrow, broad, I think that trade-off looks different. And so that's one axis maybe worth thinking about. The other one, and this is particularly true in a lot of enterprise scenarios, I don't think LLMs. Actually, let me rephrase that. It's worth thinking through what are the 5 or 10 or 20 highest value workflows that give you let you capture 80% of the value for that particular domain, right? Because if that exists and you can get to that either through brute force engineering those automations with some LLM harness, or maybe you do need to make an agent first approach to those 10, 15, 20 workflows, then that's a good spot to be in. It might even be the case that you don't have to train a fully open-ended agent or LLM to capture that value, right? You can build some LLM harness. So I think, yeah, like that's worth thinking through as well. The approach really depends on who your audience is, who your customer is, what are they asking for. In the case of an end consumer, I would say that like even within each like take any category like shopping, like no two people have the same behavioral patterns on the web in how they shop, right? Like some people, even for a $20 purchase, they'll have 20 tabs open, they'll do their research of like the pros and cons reviews, etc., before they buy something. And some other people, like one of my co-founders, for example, she will go on Amazon, search for the item, buy look at the first one that seems good enough and hit buy, and that's it. It's like a 2-minute workflow.
I'm someone who likes to think that I got a deal, so I always fall for these discounts, which oftentimes aren't necessarily with discounts. Maybe to make it even more tangible for those listening, within, I think you had defined it before as like monitoring the web for anything you care about as kind of the overarching thing that you do. That is both a very broad statement, but also a very specific one. What was kind of your process to arrive on that being a big enough problem worth solving, right? But also at the same time specific enough where you can solve it, and then also right valuable enough of an outcome that you can deliver so people would actually use this. Obviously, right, the best way to find out is to build it, but ideally you get to at least a decent confidence score before you build too much along that.
I think it was 2 or 3 things. One was that from a research standpoint, it was clear that we have to go after something more horizontal. That if we did that and if we sourced the data for it, then that would lend good generalization to these models. So a very tech first, a model first view was that. From a customer facing or from a user value standpoint, it was basically the observation that a lot of day-to-day tasks in people's work or personal life do have this kind of a monitoring flavor, right? Like in people's personal life, some fall squarely into this. Like, for example, if I'm house hunting or apartment hunting, I want to monitor as many sources in as timely a manner as possible, and I want to be notified of all of them. So when someone's going through that 1 month in their lives, this is like a perfect fit for it. But even other stuff, right? Like there's always some tasks going on in the background in people's lives that have this kind of a monitoring flavor. Um, like I know I have a trip to India coming up early next year. Right now it's still fuzzy. I don't have the dates concretized. I haven't looked at flight tickets. I know roughly it might be like 2 weeks, but it can be 2 weeks in January or February or March. I haven't quite fixed it. Like, and I am not ready today to go on Google Flights and fill out that form because a lot of these variables and constraints are mushy in my head. But if I can just tell an agent, that here's all my contacts, just keep track of, right? This task is a monitoring like task, right? So that's another example. And then on the enterprise and work setting, there's much clearer fits for this. Like if someone wants to source leads, like a sales team or a GTM team, and they have both the regular approaches of like looking at I don't know, like seed, Series A, Series B startups who are announcing a fundraise to then source leads from, or more creative approaches, like if they want to monitor, I don't know, LinkedIn or Twitter or Reddit for someone posting a bad review of a competing product and then use that as a signal into their sourcing pipeline. It's a pretty good fit for that, right? So yeah, like the second thing to come back to your question was this observation that a lot of tasks in people's personal and work life have this kind of monitoring flavor. And the third was that going out with something horizontal gets us data on what these pockets look like. Like, where are we seeing interest? Which domains are our users coming from? Where is this resonating? To then build out the next mile and so on for each of those pockets, right? So starting horizontal, so then we can go deep into end-to-end workflows and automating some of those.
These are almost like kind of three different criteria that you kind of listed, or things that you thought through. Did you have some sort of a decision-making framework or like scoring mechanism for this between you and your co-founder? So like, is there anything anyone can take away from that kind of decision making? I'm always fascinated by how early companies make quite important decisions. Is there anything, or was it just you guys locked yourself in a room and didn't leave until you agreed on where you wanted to go?
I think the first one fell out of the end-to-end DoorDash experiment. So like that was very empirical. We had to have run that experiment to have landed on that outcome, or would have had to have seen that experiment be run by some other company to have come like to that insight. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything particularly insightful, like a framework here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or maybe
we spent quite a bit of time thinking through this, like thinking of these different constraints and what makes sense given these constraints.
a different way to ask the same question is, with your horizontal scope now, and that, like, with that potentially being super broad, how do you decide kind of what to build next if it isn't just kind of a small iteration within the existing scope?
So we broadly think of ourselves as like a web agents company. So yeah, like a company building the technology that powers agents that can take actions on your behalf on the web. Um, the prosumer product is like one surface. So Scouts is like one surface. Earlier this week, actually, we announced an API which is opening up the tech that powers Scouts to a broader set of developers. So it's an entirely different
Cool.
distribution channel, right? And yeah, like there is always this tension of like, okay, like there's some things that consumers are going to request. There's some things that businesses would have on their feature wish list. Some requests that developers are asking us for. I think it is early right now. We're in that phase of like running a bunch of different experiments on this. Each of these channels has different risk appetites, different tolerances, different readiness levels for web agents. With the consumer product, like our guiding principle is that we have to demonstrate what this reimagined way of interacting with the web looks like, right? So new experiences, agentic transactions, or like agentic payments, agentic logins. So agents being able to log into services on your behalf, agents being able to transact on your behalf. Those are top of mind for us for the consumer facing product. For APIs, as and when some of these capabilities are sufficiently robust, we start giving sometimes even early access to some of these features via our API, because there we can work with individual developers to concretize it for specific workloads. So, for example, for agentic payments, agentic checkouts, it may not be ready to be productized um, for a consumer-facing product today, like in a way that like works across all US merchants. But as if it works in certain pockets or with certain merchants, then we can start making that capability available through our API to developers who want to build automations around those merchants, right? So there's different trade-offs. We're kind of in that phase of like running a bunch of experiments, see what sticks, and making the technology broadly available.
How much of and this is almost like an intellectually lazy question, but an important one. How much of a topic is like, how close are you flying to the sun? And the sun being the hyperscalers. Because one of the reasons why a lot of folks on the investing side, like myself, um, are currently leaning a lot heavier into kind of vertical AI companies because right, you can build up data domain specific data modes, integrate them with specialized workflows, deliver clear ROI, and so on. Versus a much more horizontal approach, right? Has a much bigger ambition and scale and everything, but it's also what all these hyperscalers are also going after. How much of it both how much did that impact both your decision making as well as kind of the almost like how you think about building things daily, and even like potentially tell me that all VCs that are mainly focusing on vertical opportunities are just intellectually lazy and have it wrong. Like, please push back. Please push back on any of this as well.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wish there were more consumer focused companies than they currently are. Especially given the excitement around the technology, like AI and agents and so on. But to answer your question more directly, I do think at some level, what we are going after is competitive with the bigger players. Um, at the same time, like we've carved out a wedge for us. Like Scouts, I think, is a very specific value proposition and a very specific product. Um, in some ways, it is similar in its value proposition to scheduled tasks, which is available in Perplexity or OpenAI for a while. Uh, but for users, and some of our users have told us this who've tried both, they tell us that like Scouts just works much better on average compared to some of these other tools for these tasks. And the reason for that is the sort of powerful web navigation agentic capabilities that we've built out that power Scouts today. So, and it takes quite a bit to make web agents work that's outside of the core model. So like there are a bunch of frontier labs that are sort of focusing on the model, but to make something work for the web, I think there's a lot of infrastructural pieces outside of the core model. So there's the orchestration piece of it, like the stack has to be compatible with wherever APIs and MCPs are available, as well as the long tail of websites that never had APIs and will likely not have MCPs. It also has to like these agents have their own cloud browsers. They're working there's teams of agents working in the cloud, and so the layer of the infra that we maintain in house is one that lets us easily switch from like one cloud browser provider to another, and so on. And all of this has to be built out in a seamless, robust manner. So it is, yeah, we're within the web agent space, but the stack, infra, modeling capabilities, product eng, everything is sort of vertically integrated to deliver a compelling user experience. And so that's sort of the niche that we've carved out for ourselves, and we're trying to grow our corner of the internet.
Selfishly, I want to ask, if you were in my shoes, right, in assessing companies, founding teams at the very start, they don't really have much of a product to show for. I don't know, if you had walked in with a DoorDash product and we had a potential fundraising conversation, what is it that you would both test for and put most weight on outside of, right, obviously the raw horsepower of the founders and the agency and so on? What would you kind of look for, maybe more in terms of skill set or understanding of the world, that is important to actually build something unique and differentiated specifically for a more horizontal kind of agentic company in today's day and age?
I would say two things. One is web agents are a space where there's still a lot of research work to be done. It's not a space where the technology is ready and all that's left to do is productizing it. And so making sure that the team has what it takes to deliver on state-of-the-art models and capabilities would be one. And the other is more from like a market standpoint, that like if you buy that there's a lot of repetitive workflows people do in their browsers that are a total time sink, and they would rather focus their time on something that's more meaningful, um, then there are a lot of workflows to be automated there, right? And so if yeah, I think this is a huge market opportunity, but it is, yeah, like given the first point, it's going to take a while for it to play out, for it to mature.
The main thing that I take away is this is a space where you actually don't just need to have the technical horsepower, but also the research horsepower in order to actually do something that is potentially truly differentiated in what is a very fast moving and competitive space. Which right, if we shift gears a little bit into how you kind of think about things organizationally, as well, building in such a fast moving horizontal space. What is, right, if you think about your own kind of timer horizon and planning horizon and kind of how far do you look ahead as you make decisions? Help me kind of understand the timelines. Is it like a month? Is it 6 months? Is it 2 years? Right? Kind of, it used to be that you have your 5+ year vision and you can almost map it out in the like workflow productivity era of software. That's a lot easier. Like, how do you think about these things today?
So we typically plan in about 3-month roadmaps. Um, yeah, that's sort of the horizon where like you can make reasonable bets and like try and ship stuff quickly. Anything longer, I think there's like higher variance to both what may be possible internally and like what might change in the world for us to making projections of. So we have like rough sketches of like what the world might look like 6 months or where we need to be 6 months or 1 year from now. But 3-month roadmaps is what we do, and we sort of iterate based on that.
When we last talked, you also mentioned that kind of your internal processes and your organizational structure and everything changed quite a bit since moving from the kind of initial more vertical focus to a horizontal one. Can you explain a little bit how you changed things and what some of the learnings were along the way that others can potentially avoid some of the mistakes maybe that you made early on?
Maybe just to clarify, I wouldn't say we were like the first thing that we built around food ordering being an end-to-end thing that was very much intended to be like early internal prototype. We weren't like as a company sort of organized very different. Yeah. Um, yeah, so not a lot changed organizationally in how we were set up to where we are right now. But now, like we do have a product out there. There's a few thousand users using it. It's still in a closed beta. Depending on when this podcast comes out, it might even be generally available. We are sort of shooting towards making it generally available ASAP. So like there are some things that have changed in the team and how we are organized to that are more related to just a product being out there that people are using, right? So for example, one thing is that like we take user feedback extremely seriously. Like all onboarding emails, for example, go out as me, and then anyone can reply to them, and the replies sort of land in my inbox. And I sort of like that as a way to get a very close understanding of where our tech and our product is working well versus not, and so on. We have a very strong culture of like dog fooding the products. So every single week, we spend an hour or two dog fooding tens of new features that we may be working on that haven't made their way to the end product. Like everyone does it on our team does a rotation on user feedback. So yeah, it doesn't matter how much in the technical weeds you are. It's worth spending 1 week as part of a rotation, reading user feedback very closely. Yeah, cool. So
That's
some of
awesome.
those things won't be a thing till you aren't a thing till you have a product out there.
How do you think about, right? Because you mentioned it is still a very research heavy space. How do you think about the balance between kind of research, product, and then the rest of the organization, and how do they work together?
It has to be very tightly integrated. And we've seen ideas go both ways in our product and how we build stuff, where like some ideas are research first, where like there's certain capabilities where we think that, okay, like we've done the work, this capability is like good enough to start productizing it. And then the sort of product engineering and design part of the team sort of spend cycles figuring out, okay, what is the best way to ship this? Or the other way, where like someone from the product engineering side of things has a cool idea for what would be awesome to ship, and then that influences the research roadmap and what that typically what that might look like, right? So we've seen ideas go both ways. The important bit is for everyone to have close visibility on what's top of mind for either end of the spectrum, and not be like silos where like the modeling team is doing their own thing in isolation and the product team is doing their own thing in isolation.
For somebody else who's starting a company that has a strong research component to it as well, how would you advise them, right, kind of that they go about this to make sure that it is a well functioning team between engineering and or product and research as well? Like, what works well for you guys, and what were maybe some of the lessons that you had to learn along the way?
I think as a founder, it's very important to continue keeping in mind that like the end user does not care about what research breakthrough you've made, right? The end user only cares about whether you build something useful for them, or they're able to get to the outcome that they care about or not, right? So when like when we're in the weeds of like, I'm an AI researcher by background. I get nerd sniped by a lot of interesting ideas in research all the time. And that's great. That is healthy. It's good for experimentation and like pushing the boundary of capabilities, the frontier of capabilities. But it's always worth keeping in mind that we have to connect it to the end user, especially as a startup. Right, like if it's like a big company and like this is sort of a blue skies research bet that isn't attached to the bottom line in any way, that's different. But as a startup, you always have to connect it to the end user, that like, okay, does the user care about this research breakthrough that you're pushing towards or not? Is it going to deliver value to them or not? So as long as that perspective, that lens is always top of mind, I think most other things kind of fall into place.
Having understood kind of a lot more about how you go about things and what you're doing in the world that you live in outside of, right? I mean, obviously you want to get all the users, build a great product and so on. What are things that keep you up at night that are potentially related to this more horizontal focus that are not as obvious to kind of people listening that aren't fully right thinking about this night and day yet?
I think it's kind of, I don't know if this is a particularly insightful answer for your audience, but I'll say it anyway. Like, it's kind of related to what I said earlier about consumers. Different people have very different ways of interacting with the web. So even the same version of a monitoring or a Scouts query, to like, let's say someone wants to monitor for like whenever the Nintendo Switch 2 is back in stock, right? Um, two different people may have slightly different constraints around it, right? Like different locations, maybe different, I don't know, like shipping criteria, bundles. There might be slight constraints around it that look different for two different users. And then if you're trying to address this long tail for a fairly horizontal consumer facing product, one challenge becomes that, okay, like you are seeing samples of feedback from individual users. How do you ingest that into aggregate feedback? Where like, okay, this is a general problem in our or issue in our agent orchestration stack or the model that we need to address, right? So like that, I think I spend a lot of time thinking about, because I'm hearing those individual samples of feedback from from a whole bunch of our users, and then also trying to prioritize some of that in our modeling and research roadmap.
It's almost if I translate this into fairly generic advice, it's like be very good at trying to understand the complexities that come with what sound like fairly simple generic use cases, and right narrow it down enough where you can actually deliver something that is impactful with whatever time and resources that you have. Which again sounds super generic, but a lot of people get too excited about a space and then don't really think about it deeply enough up front, and then get lost in all the edge cases that come up along with the way. And as you said, right, error rates in small decisions compound very significantly if there's too many decisions involved in a process.
Yep, exactly. Another lens to think of this could be that like what we are building is kind of like a buyer's agent. Like each consumer of the internet now has an agent that's like filtering the internet for them and like getting them personalized results, relative to what has existed so far, which is that like website makers decide um, what you and I see on that website, and they decide which notifications get pushed to you versus not. Like you don't have an agent that's acting on your behalf that's trying to get you what you care about from LinkedIn, right? So and if like the nature of this problem is that every user wants something slightly different, even if going to the same website, and you have to have a sort of decent lens to aggregate that feedback and build things.
I'm still using kind of a basic Nespresso machine at home, but I want to upgrade to a fancier kind of espresso machine. But similar to what I said earlier, I'm trying to want to make sure I'm getting a deal here. So I'll definitely make sure to use your product to monitor it over the next couple days, because the odds are pretty high that I'm getting a good one here.
Try it, Scott. It should work quite well for this.
100%. I'm excited about that. So Brett, if you think back about kind of the journey that you went through in the last year and a half, knowing what you know now, how would you go about it differently if you were to do it all over again, based on kind of where we are today?
I think one of the and this is going to be more from a research standpoint again, but one of the bets we made around like building simulated environments to train our agents with reinforcement learning is turning out to be quite promising. And I'll sort of add more color to that. When you're training some of these web navigation agents for not just read-only tasks, but for like buying, booking, reserving things, and taking like irreversible actions on the web, on day one, like you can't let them loose on the internet because these are high stakes, irreversible actions, right? Um, and so you need some way of training them in a safe environment, and simulations are a great way to do that. Where like you have simulated versions or clones of popular websites, or maybe popular websites in each category, like shopping, real estate, social media, and so on. And that's turning out to be quite promising. And one other shift that has happened is that, like as you're probably well aware, that like um, LLM coding assistants have become quite good, and so it's almost at the point where that entire loop can be closed, where you can get an LLM to vibe code a bunch of websites that web navigation agents are um, interacting with and are self-improving through reinforcement learning. It's not quite fully automated end to end. There's a lot of human involvement right now at various points to build this out, but directionally, that's where it's trending. And so that bet, I think, has panned out quite well. The other thing I would add, and this is more from like the product that we shipped, like when we first decided that scouts or agents that can monitor the web for anything you care about is what we're going to ship as like our first product. There was a decent amount of skepticism in our team. Like we weren't sure. Like this is different, right, from what keywords look like for Google search or like what questions look like for ChatGPT. It's a different value proposition. And there was healthy skepticism in our team of like, okay, like will people get this? Like like does this resonate? Doesn't resonate, and so on. And we've been quite surprised and impressed by the feedback. Like this does resonate to quite an extent. There are a lot of tasks that fall into this bucket of like monitoring in both people's personal lives and at work. And so we were pleasantly surprised at this. And like one thing that we have seen and users tell us this is like when they first come to the product, and this is true not just for our product, but like a lot of products out there, that like the first query you enter is just something that's for testing. You're trying to get a feel for what the product is capable of. And once users create their first, second, third scout, they like something clicks that, okay, so this is how the product works, where like I come in, set up a query once, and then it keeps sending me, it proactively looks out for relevant information and keeps sending me reports. And so that's when the aha moment happens of like, okay, like this is what the use case is and how the product works. And I would say that on average, on aggregate, has gone better than the amount of skepticism that we had initially.
And tell me if I'm off here, but right, if I think of it, if I was your consumer and I say in the espresso machine example, but if I give you the name of the machine and tell you kind of find it to me anytime where it drops below a certain price, there's a lot of nuance to what I mean by that is including shipping cost, right? Where does it come from, and so on. If I don't give you, or it's all about context. If I don't give you enough context of what's in my head, and I often am not very good at communicating that context, I may be quite disappointed with results. And like when I've shopped for furniture, I've asked a bunch of LLMs for similar furniture to one I like, and it's been a disaster in terms of what comes back. Are there things that you guys have understood or that may be worth quickly talking about around how do you deal with unspecific asks but still delivering, right? Almost like you understanding what exactly I mean without me fully being able to articulate what I'm actually looking for.
There's a couple of things we do on this. One is we of course recommend our users to try and make queries more specific. Basically, the more like exactly what you said, the more context the agent has on the specific query you're interested in, the better it'll do. Um, and then the second thing that happens is that when the scout finds relevant results for your query, it will write up a report with those results where it's not just links for you to look at. It will contextualize those results with its reasoning and thought process of like why it picked out those results and why they make sense for your particular query. And the third thing that happens is that we let users give feedback on these reports so that any subsequent results incorporate that feedback. So in this example, if you put in a query of like looking for espresso machines by let's say a particular company under a certain price, and you got some results back, and there was some like something in those results didn't quite match what you're looking for. Like maybe you didn't consider any discounts, right? Like you can reply to the scout report emails and tell it that like this is great, but like also like specifically look out for deals on this particular model, and it will ingest that feedback in all subsequent scout runs that it does. So trying to reduce friction points that helps users go from that early research and early decision making process to more specific results on exactly what they're looking for. And trying to reduce friction points anywhere in that process is part of the recipe here.
The reason why I tried to tease that out is because my next question was going to be, what is it that if you, because I'm trying to take a step back, if you talk to someone or next generation of founder, they're just getting started, maybe they come from the research world as well, are very strongly technical, and are now trying to figure out, should I go through after a more vertical problem that is probably a lot more specific, or should I focus on a more horizontal problem space to get my company off the ground? What I've understood from you is one, right, in a lot of space, what in terms of look out for, one, you have to try and understand in a lot of spaces how good are the research capabilities on your team, because a lot of things haven't been solved if you want to do that. And then two, you have to get a good understanding of the actual problem that you're trying to solve and a lot of the nuances and complexities that come with it, to actually focus on something that is both large enough for it to be an interesting company, but also specific enough where you don't get bogged down in the millions, billions, whatever, thousands of edge cases that are actually important enough to deliver real user value. Is there anything else that you would kind of tell folks to think about and do their homework up front before they kind of take the leap and put a lot of resources behind a certain direction?
I think that mostly covers it. It always comes back to which of these two or three you have a core insight about, right? Like, if you're someone who has a core insight about like a particular enterprise vertical, then sticking to something standard along the agent orchestration side of things, like prompting and like obsessing over evals, is probably the right bet. You don't have to go deeper in terms of like inventing new research capabilities. But like for a team that has the kind of composition as ours, which has good intuition for like which capabilities are shippable, productizable in a 3 to 6 month horizon versus which aren't, like given two ideas, we will have the expertise in house to sort of evaluate them and like make at least a prediction of like, okay, which one are we feeling more confident about? Then we can consider taking on some of these more research heavy ideas. So it does come down to, like, where does your core insight instinct lie across these two or three things?
I think one of the things that we see quite a lot in our seat is a lot of folks that don't have that research heavy background try to go after problems that seem easy to solve and very general, which is why they think they understand them, but they very significantly understand the nuances and complexities of how to actually solve them. Because it's very easy, right? It's easy to give you a 50, 60% version, but it's very hard, as you said, to give an 80, 90+% version of things. Now, to ask you a couple closing questions, right? You are a founder who spent a lot of time in research. I'm sure you were given a lot of advice when you got started. What popular advice that is often given to startup founders do you disagree with, and why?
There's like one that I've heard being said quite a few times. No one's actually given us this advice directly, but one that I've heard is that um, um, like preemptively hiring a a head of sales kind of, or like a head of GTM kind of person, to sort of signal to, I don't know, like investors for your next fundraise or something, that like you're serious about this. Um, yeah, I don't know how widespread that is. You probably know better, but I feel like initially that just has to happen from the founders to build the right instinct. It's fine if it's slow. It's fine if it's new. But I feel like that is, unless you do that, like you're just too far cut off from like the end user and what they care about.
The way I frame it is, like if you're building a truly interesting startup, you're often uh, going into territory that hasn't necessarily been, or that hasn't been kind of explored before. And you don't just have to find product market fit, but also language market fit. And that is impossible. And language market fit is obviously very important for the go-to-market side, and that is impossible to find, or almost impossible if you outsource the decision to someone that has a small fraction of your kind of context and understanding versus you. And it sucks in a lot of, especially technical founders, don't want to go out and sell and talk to users and everything, but it is amongst the most important things that you can do early on, unless, right, but, or I guess, especially so if you're selling to kind of a business user versus like PLG, maybe slightly different in bottom-up motion, but even then, it is quite important.
Yep, exactly.
The second to last question is, right, to turn it around. What's the piece, based on what you've learned and gone through and everything, what's the one piece of advice you give to someone that comes to you that is thinking about starting a company or has just started one?
This is actually one advice that I got almost, I want to say 12 or 13 years back, from one of my seniors in college, which I think has stuck with me for a while. Whenever you like, and this has worked well for me, like, yeah, like mileage may vary for others, but like, the advice was that be a sponge when you're entering a new space. So try and absorb as much as possible when you're entering a new space, new category on anything, right? And so in my life, for example, when I started my PhD, it was like I was having a lot of fun, and it was totally fine for me to not have strong opinions on what are good research problems versus not when I went into it, right? Like I learned a lot of that from my advisors, from my peers, from looking at other researchers in the field who were publishing amazing papers, giving amazing talks, spending time with them, and so on, right? And that's kind of how I've been approaching building Yutori as well. That like we have a point of view on what the research capability and what the North Star here looks like. We're running a bunch of experiments to learn as much as possible on product, on distribution, on GTM, and what the trade-offs on each might look like. And yeah, like trying to absorb and learn as much as possible.
Right, and that sounds so obvious, but it gets very, very hard to do, to actually carve out time for learning when you're in the middle of the grind and execution and everything else. Right, and there's a million, especially a founder told it to me, or said it to me the other way. As soon as you have users in the product, it's a different company versus before, because you have so many additional problems to deal with. What's your personal way of ensuring, or that you actually do carve out time for learning? And maybe to make it very tangible for folks that are listening, what percentage of your time do you purely just dedicate to learning? Which always takes away from talking to more users or anything else.
So I do a couple of things that are like almost non-negotiables at this point. So like I have a pet dog. His name is Wolfie. Every single day I walk him in the morning, and that's kind of a good time for me to listen to a podcast and try and hear from experts in the field. Like yeah, like how they are building company, what kind of problems they ran into. Hopefully, some of your audience will listen to this one and find that useful. Um, the other thing that is a bit of a non-negotiable at this point for me is, um, like I said earlier, like all the onboarding emails that go out to users of our product go out as me, so people can reply, and that reply lands right in my inbox. So every single day, I spend about at least an hour responding and reading through users' feedback. And both of these are like great channels to learn from. Like one is clearly people who are ahead in their sort of company building trajectory than us that we can learn from. And the other is directly from our users, that like, okay, like what is working well, what's not working well, what can we improve. So like week over week, we are continuing to like build a better experience, make better decisions, and so on.
I walk to and from the office every day, and that's 15 to 20 minutes each day. And that's my podcasting audiobook time. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it really compounds over time. And it's outside of calling my parents, that's like a non-negotiable, basically, to just listen to these things. Last question for mine, because we talked about talking to customers quite a bit and learning from them. As a founder, you're my customer as an investor, and I'm always trying to learn. What's the most impactful or thoughtful thing, you don't have to name names or anything, but that a VC has done to your business and that you would kind of advise an investor like me who's not involved in the business to learn from?
I think direct and timely feedback. Many of our angels, for example, like we've been fortunate enough to have a good set of sort of prominent angels who are backing Yutori. We reach out to many of them for feedback, for help, and many of them are quite direct in their feedback, especially the people who've previously been founders, been operators, and that's like super, super useful. Because we as company builders are so deep in this space that it's very easy for us to know and get a clear visceral sense for what we are getting right. And sometimes what we are getting wrong is like we are kind of blindsided from it. That an outsider may have a much clearer point of view on, right? So yeah, like direct and timely feedback, I think, has been sort of the most valuable thing. And yeah, we've been fortunate to have many of our investors who've offered us that kind of feedback.
I always tell folks, you can only get that if the person on the other side, no matter how smart they are, if they have enough context on your business and your situation, they will only have that context if they spend the time with you. There's no substitute for that. And so, I don't know, just spend the time trying to understand their fund model and everything else, because the fund model has a huge impact on how people spend their time. And unfortunately, still too few people actually choose their investors wisely. This is a great place to end. Thank you so much for coming on. I certainly learned a lot of new things. So really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Pascal. This was fun.
Thank you.